Marcus inherited his grandmother's isolated farmhouse after she passed away from what doctors called natural causes, though the family whispered about her final weeks, how she'd become paranoid, claiming someone was stealing food from her kitchen, how she'd started setting two places at the dinner table for meals she ate alone. The old Victorian house sat on 40 acres of barren land, miles from the nearest neighbor. Marcus didn't mind the isolation. After his messy divorce and losing his job, he craved the solitude. The house was fully furnished with his grandmother's antiques, heavy wooden furniture that had been in the family for generations, portraits of stern-faced ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow him through the rooms, and that massive dining table where Sunday dinners had been held for over a century. Everything was peaceful for the first week. Marcus spent his days cleaning out closets, going through old photo albums, and trying to decide what to keep and what to sell. But on his 8th night in the house, at exactly 7:47 p.m., he heard the unmistakable sound of the front door creaking open. Marcus grabbed a baseball bat and crept toward the foyer, but found the door locked tight, deadbolt engaged. The sound of footsteps echoed from the dining room, heavy boots on hardwood, deliberate and purposeful. When he investigated, the room was empty, but he noticed something that made his blood run cold. 2 place settings on the table, complete with his grandmother's best china, silverware perfectly arranged. He hadn't set the table. He was certain of it. The next night, same time, same sounds. This time Marcus was ready, hiding behind the kitchen doorway with his phone recording. The footsteps came as expected, but his camera showed only empty hallways. Yet when he checked the dining room afterward, there were 2 plates of food steaming on the table. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, his grandmother's favorite Sunday dinner. The food smelled incredible, and Marcus realized he hadn't eaten since breakfast. Against his better judgment, he sat down and took a bite. It was the best meal he'd ever tasted, exactly like his grandmother's cooking, warm and comforting and perfect. He devoured everything on his plate, feeling more satisfied than he had in months. On the 3rd night, Marcus didn't hide. He sat at the dining table at 7:45 p.m., waiting. The front door opened right on schedule, and this time he saw him, a tall man in a black Victorian suit, his face gaunt and pale, walking with measured steps into the dining room. The man's eyes were sunken deep into his skull, and when he smiled, his teeth were yellowed and sharp. "Ah, Marcus," the man said, his voice like gravel scraping concrete. "I was wondering when you'd finally join me properly. Your grandmother and I had such wonderful dinners together." The man sat across from Marcus, and immediately 2 plates appeared between them, filled with that same delicious pot roast. But now Marcus could see what his hunger had blinded him to before. The meat was raw and bleeding, crawling with maggots, pieces of bone and hair mixed throughout. "She was such an excellent cook," the man continued, cutting into the rotting flesh with apparent relish. 57 years we shared meals together. Ever since that night I helped her with your grandfather's problem." "My grandfather died of a heart attack," Marcus said, though his voice sounded distant to his own ears. The man laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. "Is that what she told you? Oh, Marcus, your grandfather caught us together, you see. Caught your sweet grandmother feeding me, caring for me, loving me the way a woman should love. He threatened to expose our arrangement, to tell the family about our special dinners." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Marcus could see his breath, but he couldn't move from his chair. "So your grandmother made a choice. Love or loyalty? And she chose love." He gestured toward the kitchen with a piece of rotting meat skewered on his fork. "He's been our main course for decades now. Your grandmother was so creative with the recipes. Heart stew, brain casserole, liver and onions. We made him last a wonderfully long time." Marcus tried to stand, to run, but his body wouldn't obey. Looking down, he saw thick iron chains wrapped around his ankles, though he hadn't felt them before. "You see, Marcus, your grandmother made a bargain. I would love her, protect her, keep her company in this lonely old house, and in return, she would feed me. Human flesh tastes so much better than anything else, you understand. The fear, the pain, the betrayal, it seasons the meat perfectly." The man reached across the table and touched Marcus's hand. His fingers were ice cold and felt like they were made of wet clay. "But your grandmother got old, got sick. The meals became less frequent, less substantial. I told her she needed to bring me fresh meat, young meat, someone who would understand our arrangement. She would never—" "Oh, but she did, Marcus. Who do you think called you when she got sick? Who suggested you come stay with her, help take care of the place? Your grandmother was many things, but she was never a fool. She knew she was dying, and she knew I would need someone new to cook for me." Marcus looked down at his plate and saw that he'd been eating the entire time they'd been talking. The rotting meat was half gone, and he could taste copper and decay in his mouth. But somehow, impossibly, it still tasted delicious. "The beautiful thing about our arrangement," the man whispered, leaning forward, "is that it gets easier every night. Soon, you won't even notice the taste, the smell, the screaming from the basement when I bring you fresh ingredients. You'll just cook and serve and smile just like your grandmother did." Marcus felt something wet running down his chin and realized he was drooling, his body already craving more of the terrible feast. The man smiled wider, showing rows of pointed teeth. "Welcome to the family, Marcus. Dinner is served at 7:47 every night. Don't ever be late." The chains around Marcus's ankles grew heavier as the man's laughter echoed through the house. In the distance, Marcus could swear he heard his grandmother's voice calling from the kitchen. "Marcus, dear, could you help me with the roast? We're having company for dinner." Sarah Chen had built her entire life around her online presence. At 24, she was a successful lifestyle influencer with 2.3 million followers across platforms, endorsement deals with major brands, and a luxury apartment in downtown LA that served as the backdrop for her carefully curated content. Every moment of her day was documented, photographed, and shared with her devoted audience. Her morning routine videos got millions of views. Her outfit of the day posts drove fashion trends. Her inspirational quotes were shared thousands of times. Sarah lived for the likes, the comments, the validation from strangers who felt like they knew her intimately through her constant sharing. "Good morning, beautiful humans," she chirped into her ring light at 6 a.m. sharp, her apartment perfectly lit and staged. "Ready to slay another amazing day together?" She had built her brand on authenticity and accessibility, real moments with real emotions. Though every candid shot was carefully planned, every vulnerable post strategically timed for maximum engagement. Her followers loved feeling like they were part of her daily life, her struggles and triumphs, her journey towards self-improvement and success. But Sarah's perfect online world began to crack on a Tuesday night in October. She woke up at 3:17 a.m. to her phone buzzing incessantly. Notifications were flooding in, thousands of likes, hundreds of comments, shares exploding across all her platforms. Groggily, she opened her apps to see what content had gone viral. What she found made her blood run cold. Posted to her Instagram story 2 hours earlier, a video of her sleeping filmed from an angle above her bed. She was curled on her side, breathing softly, completely unaware she was being recorded. The timestamp showed it had been posted from her own account using her own phone. But she lived alone. Her apartment was on the 15th floor, and she always locked her doors and windows. Security cameras covered every entrance to the building. The comments were disturbing. She looks so peaceful when she doesn't know she's performing. Finally, authentic content. This is what we've been waiting for. Real Sarah. More sleeping videos, please. Sarah immediately deleted the post, but within minutes, another appeared. Her brushing her teeth that morning, filmed from inside her bathroom mirror. Then another, her making coffee, shot from inside her kitchen cabinets. Every video was posted from her own accounts with her face clearly visible, but filmed from impossible angles, as if cameras were embedded in her walls, her furniture, her very home itself. Sarah changed all her passwords, enabled two-factor authentication, even contacted the platform's security team. But the posts kept coming. Sarah showering, Sarah crying on her couch, Sarah eating dinner alone, all from perspectives that should have been impossible. Her follower count was exploding. The mysterious videos were getting millions of views, shared across every social platform. News outlets were picking up the story. Influencers' account hacked with intimate footage. But Sarah knew this wasn't a hack. This was something else entirely. The comments grew stranger. We've been watching her for months in the shadow realm. She's the perfect subject. So desperate for attention, she radiates psychic energy we can feed on. The barrier between dimensions is thinning around her. Soon, she'll be ready for permanent upload. Sarah tried going to a hotel, but the videos followed her there. Her phone wasn't even with her when footage of her hotel room appeared on her Instagram Live, showing her pacing frantically while dark shapes moved in the corners that couldn't be seen with the naked eye. She hired cybersecurity experts, changed devices entirely, even lived without any technology for a week. Nothing worked. The videos kept coming from cameras that didn't exist, posted by accounts she couldn't access. Then Sarah began seeing them in person. Dark figures in her peripheral vision, always just out of direct sight. When she looked straight at them, they vanished, but she could feel them watching, recording, feeding on her fear and desperation. Her friends stopped visiting when lights would flicker and electronics would malfunction around her. Her family begged her to see a psychiatrist, convinced she was having a breakdown. But Sarah knew the truth. She had attracted something from beyond the digital veil. Entities that exist in the spaces between pixels and data streams. The final video appeared on all her accounts simultaneously. Sarah, sitting at her apartment at her computer, tears streaming down her face as she typed her goodbye message to her followers. But in the background, dozens of shadow figures surrounded her, their forms barely visible, like television static given shape. "I wanted to be seen so badly," she said to the camera she couldn't find. "I fed off your attention, your likes, your comments. I made myself so visible, so documented, so desperate to be watched, that I attracted watchers from somewhere else." The shadows moved closer, and Sarah's image began to pixelate, her voice becoming distorted. "They're not from our world," she continued, her words echoing with digital artifacts. "They exist in the dark web, the spaces between servers, feeding on human attention and fear. And I gave them exactly what they wanted. A constant stream of content, a life lived entirely for the audience." The video quality degraded as the shadows merged with Sarah's image. Her followers watched in horror as she seemed to dissolve into the screen itself, becoming part of the digital realm that had consumed her life. "Thank you for watching," she said as her form became completely digital, her voice now a harmonic blend of ones and zeros. "Please like and subscribe. The show never ends here." Sarah's social media accounts are still active, posting content 24/7. Her followers assume it's automated, scheduled posts from before her disappearance. But the videos show her trapped in an endless digital loop, performing for an audience of entities that will never let her go. Sometimes, late at night, influencers and content creators report receiving friend requests from Sarah's accounts. If they accept, they begin having the same experiences. Videos of themselves posted from impossible angles, shadow figures in their peripheral vision, and the gradual realization that they're being watched by something that feeds on human desperation for attention. The last known footage of Sarah shows her in what appears to be a digital recreation of her apartment, smiling at the camera with eyes that have been replaced by static. Behind her, the shadows wave at the audience. "Don't forget to follow me in the dark web," she says, with a voice that sounds like dial-up internet. Content creation is forever here.
Dr. Elizabeth Kane had performed over 3,000 autopsies during her 15-year career as a forensic pathologist. She prided herself on clinical detachment, the ability to examine the most brutal crime scenes and mangled bodies with scientific objectivity. Death, in all its forms, held no mystery or terror for her. It was simply biology, the inevitable end of organic function. Her colleagues at the county morgue respected her methodical approach and steady hands. Elizabeth could determine cause of death from the smallest details, reconstruct final moments from evidence invisible to untrained eyes. She worked primarily nights when the morgue was quiet and she could focus without interruption from detectives, attorneys, and grieving families. The morgue itself was a sterile, fluorescent-lit maze of examination rooms, cold storage units, and administrative offices. Built in the 1960s, it had that institutional atmosphere of a place designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Elizabeth had made it her second home, more familiar with its rhythms than those of her empty apartment across town. But her orderly world began to unravel on a November night when she arrived to find signs of unauthorized entry in the storage area. Nothing major, just a few containers slightly out of place, temperature logs showing brief fluctuations in one of the refrigeration units. Security cameras revealed nothing, and Elizabeth assumed it was a maintenance issue or careless day shift worker. The pattern became clear over the following weeks. Body parts were disappearing. Never entire corpses, just specific pieces. An eye from a car accident victim. Fingers from a suicide. Elizabeth implemented additional security measures, changed access codes, and began staying later to monitor the facility personally. But the thefts continued, and she started feeling washed during her late-night shifts, catching glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision that vanished when she looked directly. The night she met the collector started like any other. Elizabeth was working on a particularly complex case, a young woman found dismembered in an abandoned warehouse, the killing ritualistic in its precision. She was documenting wound patterns when she heard movement from the storage area. Following the sound, Elizabeth found a figure hunched over one of the specimen containers. He appeared to be a man in an expensive charcoal suit, but as he turned toward her, she saw that his face was wrong, assembled from pieces of different people, skin tones and textures that didn't match, features that belonged to corpses she'd examined in recent weeks. "Dr. Kane," he said, in a voice that seemed to come from multiple throats simultaneously, "I've been admiring your work. You handle death with such artistry." The thing that called itself the collector stood to his full height, nearly 7 feet tall, his body proportions subtly incorrect, as if assembled by someone with only a rough understanding of human anatomy. His left hand belonged to a concert pianist who died in a car crash, his right to a construction worker who'd fallen from a scaffolding. The skin around his neck showed delicate suture marks where different pieces had been joined. "I collect beautiful specimens," he continued, approaching Elizabeth with movements that were almost human, but not quite. "Death leaves such interesting marks on flesh, the way trauma shapes tissue, how fear changes the cellular structure. Your subjects arrive with such exquisite damage." Elizabeth tried to back away, but found the morgue doors had sealed shut, their electronic locks engaging with soft clicks that echoed through the empty halls. The collector moved with unnatural speed, his patchwork body making wet, squelching sounds as different pieces moved independently. "I've been watching you work for months," he whispered, now close enough that Elizabeth could smell the chemical preservatives in his borrowed flesh. "Those hands, they've touched so many of my specimens, learned their secrets, honored their final stories. They've become part of the process, part of the art. I need them for my collection." Elizabeth tried to scream, but no sound came. The collector's borrowed mouth smiled with teeth from a dozen different sources, each one perfectly white and sharp. "Don't be afraid, Doctor. You'll become part of something beautiful, something eternal. Your colleagues will continue your work, but you'll be with me, helping me understand the poetry of violent death." The last thing Elizabeth remembered was the sound of the bone saw starting up, its mechanical whine echoing through the empty morgue as the collector began his careful work. She woke the next morning at her desk, computer screen glowing with half-finished autopsy reports. Elizabeth assumed she dozed off during a long shift, but when she looked at her hands, thin red lines circled her wrists like surgical marks. On her desk lay a note in her own handwriting. "Thank you for the donation. The collection grows more beautiful." Over the following days, Elizabeth began losing pieces of herself. First, just sensations. Her fingertips went numb. Her hands felt cold and distant. Then actual flesh started disappearing. She would wake to find perfectly healed wounds where fingers had been, toes missing with no pain or memory of their removal. The collector appeared in mirrors now, standing behind her reflection with his patchwork face smiling. "You're becoming part of the art," he would whisper. "Soon you'll understand the beauty of being collected." Elizabeth tried to quit, to flee, but found herself returning to the morgue each night, compelled to continue her work. She would prepare bodies with increasingly elaborate care, documenting every wound, preserving every interesting specimen for the collector's consideration. Her colleagues noticed changes in her behavior, the way she lingered over violent cases, how she'd caress corpses with an almost loving touch, the satisfied smile that would cross her face when examining particularly brutal injuries. The final security footage shows Dr. Elizabeth Kane entering the morgue normally, but the figure that emerged hours later moved with jerky, unnatural movements, her body clearly assembled from parts that had once belonged to different people. Her replacement found extensive journals in her desk, the handwriting changing from page to page as if written by different people. "The collection is beautiful beyond description. We understand now death is not an end, but a transformation. Each specimen tells a story, and we are honored to preserve those stories. The collector loves us all equally. Dr. Kane was the finest addition to our family." Staff members report seeing Elizabeth in the morgue late at night, her movements wrong, her face a shifting combination of features from recent cases. She continues her work with loving dedication, preparing specimens for a collector whose hunger for beautiful death will never be satisfied.
Jake Morrison had worked as a radio technician for over a decade, but the overnight shift at WKRP AM was his first solo position at a major broadcasting station. The 70-year-old station played classic hits to an audience of insomniacs, truck drivers, and night shift workers across 3 counties, its signal reaching deep into rural areas where people still relied on AM radio for company during long, dark hours. The job was simple: monitor the automated systems, ensure the signal stayed strong, and handle any technical emergencies. Jake enjoyed the solitude, the peaceful hum of electronic equipment, and the steady rhythm of songs that had been popular decades before he was born. The station's studios were located in a converted mansion from the 1940s, all dark wood paneling and heavy furniture that gave the place a comfortingly old-fashioned atmosphere. Everything was routine until Jake began experimenting with the equipment during his third week on the job. While calibrating the transmitter to optimize signal strength, he discovered something impossible: a broadcast signal between 12:47 and 12:48 a.m., a frequency that should have been empty, dead air. The signal was faint at first, just static with occasional voices buried underneath. But as Jake fine-tuned the equipment, the voices became clearer. Children singing nursery rhymes, but with lyrics that made his skin crawl. Rain around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all burn down, and never come back home. Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how do your children grow? With silver bells and coffin shells, and corpses all in a row. Jake tried to dismiss it as interference from a distant station or atmospheric anomaly, but the signal grew stronger each night. The children's voices were joined by adults, men and women singing cheerful songs about murders, accidents, disasters, and deaths, all set to upbeat melodies that would have been perfectly normal if not for their horrific lyrics. By his second month, Jake realized he was listening to what sounded like a radio variety show from the 1950s. The host spoke in the mannered style of old-time broadcasting, his voice warm and professional despite describing contemporary events that included factory explosions, tenement fires, and train derailments that had killed hundreds of people. Good evening, listeners of the Midnight Frequency. Tonight we have wonderful entertainment for you. The Sullivan children will sing about the car accident that took their family. Mrs. Henderson will share her recipe for poison cake, and our studio orchestra will perform their arrangement of the Screaming Bridge Waltz. The show seemed to broadcast every night between midnight and 6 a.m., always on that impossible frequency, always featuring entertainment themed around death and suffering. Jake began recording the broadcasts, fascinated despite his growing unease. Then, during his 8th week on the job, Jake heard his own name. "Tonight, we have a special treat, listeners," announced the host, his voice crackling through decades of static. "We've been joined by Mr. Jake Morrison, who's been faithfully listening to our program from his lonely station. Jake, we know you're out there. We can feel you listening." Jake's blood ran cold. He wasn't broadcasting. His equipment was set to normal operations. No microphone active. No way for anyone to know he was monitoring that frequency. "Hi, Jake," chorused the children's voices in perfect unison. "We've been waiting so long for you to join our show. We have such wonderful songs to teach you." Every radio in the station crackled to life simultaneously, all tuned to that impossible frequency despite being set to different channels. Car radios in the parking lot began playing the broadcast. Jake's phone started streaming the audio through apps he'd never downloaded. The host's voice filled every speaker. "Jake works at WKRP, doesn't he, children? The same station where little Bobby Martinez was electrocuted in the transmitter room in 1953, where Sarah Chen was crushed by falling equipment in 1967, where Marcus Webb was found hanging from the broadcast antenna in 1982. Jake had never heard these names, but something about them felt familiar, like half-remembered dreams. He frantically searched the station's archives and found the records. 3 employees who had died in accidents decades before Jake was born, all ruled as workplace mishaps or suicides. "They're all here with us now, Jake," the host continued, his voice now coming from the walls themselves. "Bobby sings such beautiful songs about electricity and copper dreams. Sarah's favorite tune is about the weight of machinery and broken bones. And Marcus, well, Marcus knows all the best songs about rope and gravity. The children began singing again, but now Jake could hear adult voices mixed in, the voices of the dead workers, singing about their deaths in cheerful, innocent tones. Bobby got shocked and his heart went pop. Now he glows in the dark and he'll never stop. Sarah went crunch like a broken toy. Now she dances forever with metallic joy. Marcus swung high on his antenna rope. Now he flies through the air without any hope. Jake tried to leave the station, but every door led back to the broadcast booth. Windows showed only reflections of the control room, even when they should have faced the parking lot. The building had become a maze with no exit, trapping him with the impossible radio show that knew his name and wanted him to join. "The beautiful thing about our frequency, Jake," whispered the host, his voice now coming from inside Jake's own head, "is that once you start listening, you can never really stop. We broadcast from the spaces between life and death, collecting voices of those who died in places of communication, radio stations, telephone exchanges, television studios." Jake looked at the control board and saw his own reflection in the glass, but his mouth was moving, speaking words he wasn't saying. "This is Jake Morrison at WKRP, broadcasting live from the frequency of the dead. Tonight, we have a special program featuring all your favorite songs about joining us forever." The reflection smiled while Jake's real face remained terrified. His reflection began operating the equipment with practiced ease, adjusting levels and cueing music while Jake stood paralyzed, watching himself become part of the show. "Don't be afraid, Jake," said the reflection cheerfully. "Broadcasting is what we do here. It's what we've always done. Welcome to the Midnight Frequency, where the show never ends and the audience grows larger every night." The children's voices surrounded Jake as reality collapsed into radio waves and electromagnetic fields. "Ring around the radio, pocket full of static. Ashes, ashes, Jake falls down and broadcasts forever now." Station management found the booth empty the next morning, all equipment functioning perfectly, but no sign of Jake Morrison. The overnight shift has remained vacant since then, but every night between midnight and 6 a.m., Jake's voice can be heard on the impossible frequency, hosting a show that features Bobby, Sarah, Marcus, and the singing children. They take requests now, and their audience is growing. Radio technicians across the country report picking up the midnight frequency, and some have been heard answering when Jake calls their names on the air. The broadcast is getting stronger, reaching further, always looking for new voices to join their eternal program of death and static and songs that should never be sung by the living.